All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Hagen History Center Spring 2021 Speaker Series. Tonight, we have a very special initiative to talk about. My name is Shelby Gramble, Events and Outreach Coordinator at the Hagen History Center. I have just a few announcements from the History Center before we get started. We are currently closed to the public due to the ongoing pandemic, but we are working to complete new and inspiring exhibits to be open in July. Please check our website, eriehistory.org, for up-to-date events, blogs, and more. If you have any questions during the presentation tonight, please feel free to drop them in the comments section below. If you are listening to or watching a later broadcast of this program, please still feel free to send us your questions. Joining me on the call tonight is Rebecca Weiser, curator at the Hagen History Center. And leading the conversation tonight is Dr. Rhonda Matthews. She is a member of Erie's Black Wall Street and is an associate professor of politics at Erie University, but comes to us today as a community member interested in the expansion and inclusion of the many histories that have made the city of Erie what it is. The Lest We Forget initiative is a historical archive effort to begin collecting the histories of Erie's many diverse communities, starting with the Black community. I am going to mute myself and turn it over to you, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Shelby and to Becky for inviting me to come and speak today. And they know about this initiative because we're working together on it. Erie's Black Wall Street and the Hagen History Center are working together to bring this initiative to some realization. So, and thank you all for coming tonight and listening to what I have to say. So what I'm going to do is just do a run through of kind of an overview of the project, the initiative, which then also has a project attached to it. And then I want to talk a little bit, I want to end my talk today talking a little bit about the meaning of history writ large. So I think that at the end of it, that you will get an opportunity to ask questions. Am I right, Shelby? Okay. Yep. So you'll get an opportunity to ask questions. So I won't talk the whole time. I'll try to make sure that I give a little bit of time for us for you to ask me questions and for us to talk about history kind of writ large. Okay. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, and I'm going to start this from the beginning. Okay, so tonight I want to talk to you about Lest We Forget, the Lest We Forget initiative. It is a historical archive initiative for the greater Erie region. This will be the first year that we undertake this initiative. And the way that we've envisioned it is that Lest We Forget is the umbrella initiative, and that every year we will have a project that focuses on the collection of histories and stories of a different community of people in and around Erie. So that's the gist of the project. And when we think about it, we don't think about it as a short-term initiative. We think about it as a long-term initiative so that we can collect as much history and tell as many stories and collect and display as many artifacts as are necessary to construct a broad range history of Erie, where we've been and who we are now, how we came to be who we are now. So as I mentioned before, this is a collaboration between Erie's Black Wall Street and the Hagen History Center. For one, for me, I think it's really important that community organizations collaborate, especially when it's for a movement towards something greater for the broader community. I am not a silo type of person. I like the idea of people and groups working together, because when you get people who are interested in different parts of the same thing, what you wind up with is a collaboration that takes you in places that maybe you never thought you would go. So Erie's Black Wall Street is a nonprofit organization in Erie that is focused upon the Black community, primarily through through entrepreneurship, but also through other aspects of the community. Its goal is uplift of the Black community. Um, the Hagen History Center is probably the premier institution of history in Erie, right? Um, it serves as a place of learning. It serves as a museum. It serves as a repository for Erie's history. So it makes sense that if you want to do a project that helps to tell the complete story of Erie, that you would need an organization that is focused upon one of the communities within the city, and an organization whose sole purpose is to tell the history of a place. And so in this instance, we're talking about Erie. So it makes sense that we collaborate. And it's through our discussions, through our meetings, through our work together, that we've come to think of this project not just as a project of the Black community of Erie, but as a project of Erie as a whole. Okay, so why? So why do we need to tell the story? So let me give you a little bit of background about me. I am not from Erie. We've lived in this area for almost 25, 26 years now. But I'm not a native of Erie. I actually was born and spent the first 16 years of my life in Los Angeles and in other parts of Southern California. And another significant portion of my life was lived in the Deep South, in Mississippi, in Louisiana, in South Carolina. And so I have really deep roots in the South. And when I was a teenager, which is when my mom divorced my dad and moved us back to her hometown, and in fact into the same neighborhood where she was raised. So during that time, those were formative years for me. And during that time, I met a lot of the people who were important in her childhood. But of course, by the time I met them, they were much older. And so whenever we would be around older people, they would tell us stories. And a lot of people just think of it as telling a story, but it's not. What it is a history. Usually when older people were telling us about, what they did and how their lives went when they were kids, etc., what they were doing was telling us about them, but they were also telling us the history of the neighborhood, the history of the city, the history of the state, the history of the nation. And so I got a real grounding in history just through the people I met when we moved to the South. When I came to Erie, one of the things I did was I looked for the histories of the people who lived here. And what I found is that in Erie, pretty much only the story of one group of people is being told. That's an oversight, right? And it is an oversight that omission is sometimes intentional. It's sometimes unintentional. Whatever the motive for the omission still stands. And if a community is to be healthy, if it is to be whole, then we have to have the complete history of it. And so one of the things I seek to do in constructing the proposal for this project was to help to fill in those gaps. And so in doing so, I wanted to start with the African American community, because that is one of the largest and one of the oldest communities in the city. So if we want to tell the history of Erie, we have to begin to bring in the histories of other groups of people. The way we do that is, or I'm sorry, the way we do it and make sure that people from large numbers of groups in our population know it, is we put it in institutions. Right? So when you go to a museum, you get a full depth and breadth of the history of the place, because it includes the history of lots of people. So when you go to a museum, or when you go to a historical society, or when you go to an archive and you see the history of a place that includes all of the people that have been there, it makes it important. And that's one of the reasons that that the Hagen History Center is helping to sponsor this project, is because they understand the importance of history and filling in those gaps of knowledge. The last part here is that research is just important. I know when people talk about history, they don't really think of it in terms of research, but it is, right? If you are asking people their stories, excuse me, if you're asking people their stories, if you are collecting photographs or important artifacts from the history of those people, and you're cataloging it, and you're writing about it, and you're displaying it in ways that are meaningful, you're doing research. And so the answer to the question of why about this project is that it is the history of the city. This is part of what constitutes the history of the city. And to have a healthy place, we need to do that. We need to construct an inclusive historical narrative so that Erie can be complete. Okay. So the mission and the vision of the initiative are pretty simple. We just want to tell the full story, right? We want the full story of Erie to be known. But in doing so, what we seek to do is construct a platform for Erie going forward. When you know the entire history of a place, it's a jumping off point for doing, for having activity, for constructing programs, for telling the stories of the city going forward. So history is not just about the past. It is as much about the future as it is about the past. Okay, so now let me talk a little bit about how we want to do this. So we want to go out into the community and we want to collect people's stories. We want to start with a group of people that we hire to basically be community archivists, right? We would hire them and we would train them to go out into the community, or to have people come to our designated spaces and conduct interviews with them. Ask them about their lives, ask them about their experiences, show us their pictures, or video, or the artifacts. Do you have a jersey from the Pontiac's team? And what we would like to do in hiring archivists is not just to kind of bring some people in and hire them and then train them to do it. What we want to do is have a reciprocal relationship between Erie's Black Wall Street, the Hagen History Center, the project, and the people that we send out into the community. My goal is to hire young people. who are members of the community, train them how to do this kind of research, and then allow them to do it. One of the reasons for that is because when you engage young people in gathering this kind of knowledge, being a part of it, you engage them in the community, not just their own communities, their own ethnic communities from which they come. You also engage them in Erie writ large, right? They understand that the history that they're gathering is part of the history of Erie. There's another reason for that, uh, and that is that no older person is going to turn away a younger person who comes to them and says, you know, Ms. Jones, could you tell me about what it was like for you growing up in Erie? Right? They're more likely to engage with a younger person, maybe, than they are to engage with people maybe who are their own age. Um, you know, it's a sad part of U.S. history, but a lot of the history, particularly of people of color, is fraught, right? There's a lot of trauma there, and sometimes you don't want to necessarily share that kind of information with another person your age. But if you're educating a young person, if you're telling a young person your history, you're more likely to give a full history so that the young person understands. You're passing on that knowledge. So that's one of the first things we want to do. We want to, after we advertise for participants, we want them to be able to engage with young people who are just as interested in their stories and in the history that they tell as we are. So you all know that at this moment, part of the problem with doing this kind of work in this moment is COVID. So we are not going to be able to do a lot of in-person interviews when we first start, just because COVID. And we don't want to put anybody at risk, either people who would be telling us their stories, or the archivists that we would send out to do it. But we still have some venues like this. We still have some technology that we can use to gather some of those stories. But mostly what we would be doing at the very beginning of this year is kind of getting it set up, a lot of the bureaucratic stuff set up in order to prepare for a time when we actually can do face-to-face interviews, which we hope is coming very soon now. So the reason that Becky is on board is because yes, we're working with the Hagen History Center, but she is a curator, right? And she knows what to do when an archivist would, you know, go to a person who's being interviewed, and the person would want to share a photograph. Maybe it's a rare photograph of someone in their family or another historical figure in Erie. And they would want to donate it to the Hagen History Center for display, or they would want to allow Hagen to borrow it to put on display. She would be able to catalog that and work on preservation, right, so that people would know that their artifacts are in safe hands. So we want to build an archive of these stories, which will be recorded, of any artifacts that we gather, any papers that we gather. All of that is important, again, once again, to telling these kinds of histories. Then, once we have all of those kinds of things, stories and artifacts, the Hagen History Center will construct exhibits around the history of African American people in Erie. So again, when I talk about why we do it, it's to tell a fuller story. Here's the other thing I'm really excited about. I'm excited about all of it, but this is one of the, this is, I'm a kind of a gadget person. And so, and technology, I'm a technology person. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is the possibility of people being able to present their stories to us without us necessarily being involved. So I don't know if you know about StoryCorps. If not, it's a worthwhile endeavor to spend a little bit of time going to their website and reading up on what they do. But StoryCorps is a nonprofit organization that collects people's stories. It's part of the American Folklife Center, which is a part of the Library of Congress. And what StoryCorps does is it allows two people, it's usually two people, sometimes it can be three, but it allows two people to sit down and have 40 minutes for one person to interview the other, basically for one person to get the other person to tell their story. And once the story is told, it is uploaded to the Library of Congress's site at the, I'm sorry, the American Folklore Center site at the Library of Congress. So remember that institutional importance that I was talking about earlier? These are everyday people telling their stories from around the country, and their stories are archived at the Library of Congress. That gives them weight. It gives them importance, right? We know that they're there. That's one of the things that we seek to do with this initiative, right? Is to collect those stories and histories and make them important. Put them in the institutions in Erie, such as the Hagen History Center, that make them important, right? People have access to them, but they also understand that because they have access to them through these institutions, they are important. So anyway, so StoryCorps, the way that they've constructed their system, you can literally, on an app, tell your story. You can hit record, you can do everything that they've asked you to do. They lay out these parameters, and then you can hit record and you can send your story. That is one of the things that we plan to do with this project as well. It'll broaden our reach, right? So, you know, it's labor intensive to go and interview people face to face, and I still think that's a great way to do it. But there will be some times in which we won't be able to reach individuals. We won't be able to go to their homes. Maybe they are at higher risk for contracting COVID, or maybe they just don't want us in their homes, but they still want to tell their story. This will be an alternative for us to continue to collect those histories. The Erie culture, I think, is ready for an expansion of our history, the discussions about our history, the presentation of our history. And so in thinking about what we want to do going forward and what our future considerations are for this project, I go back to the way Erie's culture is constructed, right? This is a place that has a lot of diversity. It is a place that is deeply steeped in history. And so I think that Erie's culture at this moment is ready to receive these stories, again, so that it can move forward in terms of development, in terms of inclusion, in terms of, you know, historical discussions. Okay, so I want to introduce you to the team of people who are working on this. We have laid out the entire project, right? We've laid out a proposal. We have a proposal written. We talked about the types of things that we want to do, and each person on this team has an area of expertise that they bring to it. This is a good group, especially for this project. It's a good group generally speaking, but it's a really good group for this project because not only is everybody interested in it, everybody has some level of expertise that they bring to it. So Ms. Taylor is the founder and president of Erie's Black Wall Street. She has a background in history, and so she's a graduate of Edinburgh University. And so this is one of the areas in which she is interested, and she has brought this discussion and interest in history into her work with Erie's Black Wall Street, and it's focused on Black entrepreneurship. Devonna Paisley also has a background in social sciences. She is a sociologist, also a graduate of Edinburgh University, and also a resident of Erie, a lifelong resident of Erie. So she's already steeped in the history of the history of Erie, as well as the Black community in Erie. So she brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to what it is that we will be doing. And then we have Shelby, who you met, who graciously introduced me earlier. Shelby works at the Hagen History Center as their events coordinator. But I shouldn't say but, I should say and also has this really deep and abiding interest in the history of Erie and telling a fuller tale of the history of Erie. So she is the person who's going to be pushing out, you're going to hear from her a lot, because she's going to be pushing out these stories about what it is that we're doing on this project. And then Becky, who is the chief curator and archivist, and she took me into the warehouse where I completely geeked out about the artifacts that they have in there. She showed me a big wheel, and I lost my mind because my brothers and I could just see, just as clear as day when I saw it. I could see my brothers and I, riding a big wheel up and down the sidewalks outside of our home in Los Angeles. So she has not only the interest in it, but she's got the training. So our team is well appointed to bring these stories to life and to present them to the community in ways that are not just important, but that are beautiful. Okay, and I want to talk for a second, and I'm winding down now, so you all will have an opportunity to ask questions and for us to talk about the project a little bit more. But I want to talk, generally speaking, about history and what it means. When we tell the tale of ourselves as individuals, we don't do that in numbers. We don't do it in abstract ways. The way that we tell people who we are and what we have experienced is through storytelling. That's how we do it. That's how we engage people. That's how other people know that they can connect with us. That's how they know that, how other people know that we have something in common. We tell our stories. And there is a bit of a diminishment of the idea, well, not just the idea, but the fact of people telling their stories as if they are not important. And what I would submit to you is that in terms of history, that's the only thing that's important. The stories that we tell. How else do we know the fullness of our own experiences and the experiences of those around us? And that's history. When we start talking about people and places and experiences external to us, and in a larger field, then that's when we start calling it history. But even then, those are still stories, right? They are stories that give us dates, and they give us facts, and sometimes they give us figures, but mostly what they do is they give us stories. And those stories inform how it is that we come to see ourselves. So the stories that people told us about the people who framed the Constitution have helped us to construct our identities as Americans. And this project will allow us to hear the stories of people in Erie. And through that, we will be able to construct a shared identity about who we are as Erieites, as people who live in Erie. History is important because we pass it down from generation to generation. If we want a future that is bright, that is filled with promise, we have to tell the history of the people who constructed our society, our communities in ways that allow it to hold promise. So this is my daughter. It's my husband's and I. This is our daughter. I shouldn't have just said I because I didn't do it by myself. But this is our daughter. She'll be 21 next month. And she is history, right? Yes, she is, the latest in, the iterations of the generations in our families. But the reason that she is where she is and who she is precisely because of the history that came before her. So, and I think about that a lot. I know that when we think about the past, we often think about dusty books, right? And we think about old norms and the ways that we used to do things and tradition. And I think that that's the wrong way to think about history. The way to think about history is the future. Right? What is it that that our history provides for us that brings us to the present and that can inform our future? So I never think about just what it is that we've done in the past, because that's the wrong way to do it. History is ever present, it's all around us, and it is really important that we engage in it as often as we can, and that we engage young people in it as well. Because how are you going to maintain your history if you don't pass it on? And that is in large part what this project is about. It's about filling in those gaps of knowledge so that those who come after us will also have it and then build upon it. Okay? So that's really kind of all I wanted to say. That's kind of the end of what I had prepared to say. So I'm going to stop talking and see if anyone has any questions or wants to discuss.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews, for doing this tonight. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening and out of class to do this. So
They were happy to get an evening off. It was fine.
I bet. So I do have a question for you.
Okay.
So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be getting out our social media and everything, and we're going to hit the ground running here.
Mhm.
How can people encourage their elders to speak to you? Speak to any of the archivists who come? They're hesitant.
I think that when people know that their stories are going to be taken seriously, that makes them relax a bit. So one of the barriers that people in the Black community, and I'm saying Black community because I don't just mean in Erie. Now I'm talking writ large. One of the issues that people in Black communities have is that often when they tell their stories, that people external to the community don't take them seriously. And when and it's held up, right, by a lot of um, institutional acts. For instance, if you go to a museum, and you never see yourself represented in the museum, you never see your history represented there, then what it does is it reinforces this idea that, well, they don't take my story seriously, so why should I talk to them? And so what I would suggest to people is that, in order to try to help people to tell their stories, to one, tell them that, there are going to be different ways that you'll get to tell your stories, or I will be there with you, or maybe you can tell your story, using, the StoryCorps type app that we developed. But that the Hagen History Center is really trying to make sure that stories such as yours are important, to the history of Erie writ large, right? It's going to take, I'm glad you asked the question too, Shelby, because it's going to take, a good bit of us convincing people that we are serious and that we do take your story seriously and that we want to expand, the not just the discussions about, history in Erie, but the history of Erie itself, the representation. But I think that we have to understand that that is always going to be a question. There's always going to be a bit of doubt, about whether or not we're doing the right thing, or whether we're going to handle people's stories with care and respect. And we are. So I think it's important for people who want to encourage, their family members to participate in that, in this project, is to explain that to them, that we are taking their stories seriously, that we are being respectful, not just of them, but of the stories that they tell, of the artifacts that they, either donate to us or let us borrow. That's a good question.
Yeah. So now let's say someone's ready to tell their story to you right now. What do you suggest they do?
I suggest that they email me at rmatthews at eriesblackwallstreet.org. Because at this point, we have not hired any community archivists, but we do have some volunteers, who can, conduct the interviews and, record the stories. So that's the best way to start. Within a week, our website will be up, and there will be links there that will allow people to, get in contact with me, but that will also have information, specific details about this process and how we're going to do it. And I think that that'll go a long way towards easing people's minds too, right? When you can look and say, okay, well, this is the first step and this is the second, and okay, I know what's going to happen next. I think that is important as well.
Right.
Mhm.
And so the same thing, if someone wants to be one of your first archivists on the team, they should contact
They
you.
should contact me. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, right now, I don't see any questions coming in, but this is going to be an ongoing conversation for hopefully years and years to come. So if
Mhm.
anyone has any questions, please feel free to email Dr. Matthews. You can reach out to me as well. We'll be happy to answer them. So thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Matthews, for leading this discussion, and partnering with us. Really, we're honored,
And
excited.
thank you. Thank you. I am too. I'm very excited about this.
Awesome. Well, have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.